Well, hello everyone. Welcome back. We are continuing in our series of reading Creationism, our favorite little book. I need to figure out how to turn. From 1967. Did man get here by evolution or by creation? And joining us today, of course, Peter, as always, our host and co-host, and drumroll, PZ Myers. Hello.
Yeah, and I have a more recent. Well, is it an edition? I don't know, rewrite of the same book. So, yeah, creationists change sometimes. They don't get better, but they get different.
It's right. They order the sentences differently, but the quality of information is the same.
Yes, it's kind of like how evolution works. It's not necessarily improvement over time. It's just progressive adaptation to local circumstances. So that's what this is all about.
That doesn't sound right, because if a mutation isn't, beneficial in all circumstances, how could it be beneficial at all? I mean, that's just doesn't make any sense.
Oh, you have refuted me. I'm going to have to give up my wacky evolutionary beliefs.
Actually, it's funny we have you on, because we'll be talking about, of course, you're a developmental biologist. I happen to have run into a friend of yours recently on Twitter, one Jonathan McClatchy. He indicated he was not interested in coming on the channel with Peter and me.
Or me? You didn't want to meet with me again?
Well, he talked to you that one time, and I guess he learned from that experience. So.
Yes, that I can be very rude.
But he said I'd do a verbal debate, or not verbal, written. To which I said, okay, well, what do you want to talk about? And he kind of went, whoosh.
Oh.
So, yeah, he kind of disappeared on me, but that's okay.
Yeah. But he wouldn't have anything interesting to say anyway.
I imagined you can be very rude. I follow Creation Ministries International from Canada. They keep referring to you as a blogger, an atheist blogger.
Well, it's true.
It's true, but I mean, there's probably a reason why they refer to you as an atheist blogger. Because it's 9 out of 10 times it's because you had said something about evolution, which obviously is fake because you're just an atheist blogger. And every single time they do that, it makes me mad. Why the dishonesty? I mean,
well, it's not dishonest. It's sort of partially true. It's an incomplete truth.
It depends on what your definition of is.
Yeah.
So, welcome everybody in the side chat. Dan Phelps, Brian Stephen, Professor Icarus, William Chamberlain. Hello, everyone. Welcome. We were, for the first couple chapters, doing a sort of video per chapter because they were relatively short and mostly just quote mines. Most of it was just evolutionist so-and-so said this, or sorry, world famous evolutionist so-and-so said this. It was inevitably someone we'd never heard of.
Yeah, they had some really funny names among those world famous evolutionists. I mean,
the only person like they mentioned that I had heard of was Theodosius Dobzhansky, of course, but like Rutherford Platt, and there were a few others, and I was like, I've never heard these people. We kind of looked them up, and I mean, they'd done some stuff, but nothing big, really, apparently. So
right, I recall they mentioned Edwin Conklin, who's really famous in developmental biology. I mean, and I love his work, but it's it was It was late 19th century, early 20th century stuff, and he was not an evolutionary biologist at all. He was an embryologist, so he wasn't really qualified to speak on that matter.
Right. If anybody wants a good book that talks about the history of developmental biology and how it became married to evolutionary biology, highly recommend Rudolf Raff's book, The Shape of Life.
Oh, yeah.
Which I read, I guess a few months ago now. Really, really good book. Highly enjoyed it. Highly recommend.
Yeah. Unfortunately, the late Rudolf Raff, which is really sad. Yeah, I met him a few times. He was a very dynamic personality.
Yeah, I mean, given the suite of topics that he discussed, everything from echinoderm, phylogenetics to the Cambrian explosion to heck, even dinosaurs, just all over the place.
Yeah, and echinoderm developmental biology is what he's really well known for too. So,
yeah. I mean that stuff is really fascinating, because it's all like heterochrony and that sort of stuff, and it's like you're just changing slightly the adult body plan or the juvenile body plan or what have you, and then they go off in these new trajectories and new ecologies and all that sort of stuff. Very interesting stuff.
Yeah, and he also talked about indirect versus direct development. They're closely related echinoderm species where one goes through a series of progressive changes and goes through metamorphosis, and there's another species that's closely related, but it goes through this gradual development into the adult. And when you look at the developmental sequence, they're really different, which is kind of neat.
Yeah. Suffice it to say, developmental biology, pretty cool.
I say so. Yeah.
I've been reading some papers about the development of the feather recently over the past few days, and that's pretty interesting stuff. Of course, in the Ancestors Tale series we're talking about the development of not necessarily Evo Devo stuff, but like the development of human characteristics from we're sort of at the early apes now in that series, so all the stuff that's changed there. A lot of stuff. Alrighty, we ready to read some definitely true and useful?
We're not. No, but you're going to anyway.
All right, in that case, bye. Everybody shows over. No. All right. I guess I'll just read. Okay, I'll read to our favorite quote, and then we'll give our thoughts and prayers about it.
I can guess what the quote is.
I bet you can. Quote: "Since the single cell was so satisfactory in the beginning, why would it evolve into more complex forms of life? Also, when we consider that single-celled organisms, such as the amoeba, are still with us today, unchanged, what would explain why some of them evolved upward while others did not? If a single cell can be compared with an electronic computer, what of the complex life forms that contain thousands of millions of cells, all performing interrelated functions that no machine can duplicate? Under a picture of a complicated electronic device, Science Year of 1965 said, quote, a spider appears to be one of nature's simpler creatures, and a spider web the spider web seems to be a simple structure, wonderful in its symmetry. The fact is that the spider and its web are far more complex than the machinery above, with its tangle of wires and electronic brain. In observing nature, scientists are confronted with the simple and the complex, and nothing appears to be more complex than life itself," close quote. Why would a simple form of life initiate a new organ such as an eye? How could it know that an eye would be an improvement when it had never seen before? How could it know that sight was even possible? The eye is made up of many delicate, complicated connecting parts such as the cornea, pupil, iris, retina, optic nerves, muscles, and veins. All of these would have had to evolve simultaneously, or the eye would be of no use. A partial eye would be a serious disadvantage. Even Darwin admitted To suppose that the eye, with all its inimitable contrivances for adjusting the focus to different distances, for emitting different amounts of light, and for the correction of spherical and chromatic aberration, could have been formed by natural selection seems, I freely confess, absurd in the highest degree. Close quote. All right, my amazing panel. What do we think?
Where do we start? Oh, man.
So apparently amoebas have not changed in however long they've been around.
Mm-hmm.
And that's nonsense too. Okay. But that entire first section was just a variant of the why are there still monkeys argument.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
you're right. Yeah. The thing about amoebas is we are not evolved from amoebas. Amoebas are within the clade. True amoebas, because there are lots of amoeboid organisms, eukaryotes out there. I didn't say protist. Dapper can't get me on that one. There are lots of amoeboid eukaryotes, but true amoebae, are within the clade Amoebozoa. And some of them have flagella, some don't. Some have they make cysts, some don't. There's a lot of evolution that has gone on among the amoebozoans.
I kind of suspect too that the unicellular eukaryotes contain more diversity than all the multicellular eukaryotes. So that's, again, a reason why that's a really stupid thing for them to say.
Absolutely. I think we mentioned last time that amoebas have 16 times as much DNA as we have.
Which would make them higher evolved, I guess. I mean...
Right? They have more DNA than us.
They have more information. Why did God give them more information than human beings? I mean, they have to be more complex. By definition. According to creationist...
Okay, we're going to get into that.
according to creationist standards, I mean, if it has more information, then it is more complex, right? That's how they seem to figure everything out. So.
Yeah, that's why ferns and salamanders run the entire world.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, my axolotl Darwin over there, he's got a genome which is 30 times larger than humans, something like that. It's ridiculously large. And what are they using it for? What's going on in there?
Well, and he can regrow his legs, which you can't.
I mean, that's true. I can't regrow my legs. That's a fact.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Okay. Well, we've just decided we ought to bring on a guest axolotl to do all the talking here.
I haven't actually asked Darwin for his opinion on any of this stuff, so maybe he has some insight that we don't.
I have been pressing Jackson, I think, for at least 2 years now that we need an axolotl cam, that he needs to have a separate webcam during his shows that will show Darwin on screen. But
look, Peter, as someone who has been around an axolotl for the past 5 or 6 years, I can tell you they really don't do all that much. You'd be much more interested in my African cichlids over here than my axolotl. He just kind of sits and stares most of the day.
But that's what we want, because otherwise people would just turn off the sound and just focus on the salamander.
Yeah. But they look happy. I mean, they're probably one of the happiest creatures. Always a big smile. I mean,
them and what is it, quolls? Don't quolls have smiles too?
Quokkas in
quokkas, sorry, yeah, you're right. Yep, they look adorable, but they also throw their babies if they feel like they're in danger. Maybe we should learn something from them too. Who knows? What was the other one? Oh, a spider appears to be one of nature's simpler creatures. PZ.
Yeah, what does that even mean? I mean, to take a look at a spider, and they are so intricate, and they got so many parts, so many different, so many different segments of the limbs. They've got all those abilities with silk, which silk is not trivial. There's so many different kinds of silk that they can produce, and they can control it and shape it. And yeah, that's a ridiculous statement to make. Of course, then they're also going to say later that it's really complicated. So they're trying to do it both ways.
You did a video on like the evolution of spider webs one time, didn't you?
Yeah.
Or you
sure.
mentioned the research, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that there's lots of different ways that you can evolve a web, and the initial webs are probably just things like silk linings for burrows, and then you got the ones that are using as a drag line to assist in jumping around and snaring things, and then you got the orb webs, and believe it or not, cobwebs seem to be even more sophisticated than orb webs. So
Interesting. Okay.
yeah,
That was neat.
well, they're a three-dimensional web, so that's whereas
Hmm.
an orb web is just two-dimensional.
Yeah, we get some really big orb weavers down here, like these really big yellow ones, very large.
Like Archaea?
I'm not sure of the genus, but they're like they're
Yeah, the garden spider.
they're real big.
Okay.
They're real pretty, but very, very large. I did see one orb weaver. Actually, I have I naturalisted it on my phone. I can probably tell you what the species is. It was last fall. It was like as soon as it started getting cooler, there were like 3 of these giant nest webs in the. Nope, that's not it. In the spiny backed orb weaver.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
There were like 3 of them in the yard. They made these huge nets, just like it was like the first day it started getting cooler because I had to mow the lawn, and I almost ran into these guys. Their nets are enormous. So
you do realize that right now we're making an argument that these organisms are so exquisitely well designed, they must have been created, right?
Mm-hmm.
of course,
Yeah.
The fossil record of spiders is also very interesting because you have guys like was it the Archaea who have like the tails?
Oh yeah.
Weird.
Yeah. Yeah, but this fossil record for spiders is also really, really spotty. So we don't.
That's true.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think the oldest is what, 350 million years, something like that.
That sounds about right.
Yeah.
But it is neat.
Mm-hmm.
Here we go. Also the amoeba are not only unchanged, but they evolved. Some amoebas evolved upwards while others did not. Which
what is
you
evolving?
Never say higher or lower.
Yeah, what is evolving upwards?
Well, anything closer to humans clearly is upward because we are the pinnacle of creation, obviously.
Obviously we are, yeah.
Oh, but are amoeba and spiders evolving towards humans? It looks to me like they're going a different way.
No, look, our common ancestor was clearly evolving towards us. These guys accidentally fell off and went their own direction. Clearly.
Oh, okay. Yes, probably has something to do with the fall.
Probably. There were multiple falls. Like every common ancestor between us and the living clay is another fall event.
Mm-hmm.
That'd be a very interesting theology. Anyway.
That actually is a theology that was common in the 19th century.
Really?
Really, yeah. That people postulate there must have been multiple creation events. So...
Oh yeah, wait. I think I do remember that. I remember I think Darwin mentions the centers of creation, which is how creationists were having to account for biogeography because there are no marsupials in the north,
right?
Or in Africa. So how could that be? Well, God just created them over there.
And they didn't ignore the whole problem of faunal succession. They just said, okay, well, it's there in the evidence. The fossils show it. So God must have done it multiple times, multiple creation events. And just that in the Bible, it's just only the last one that counts because it included us.
Right.
Well, to be fair, in the Bible, it does have 2 creation accounts.
Right.
So in Genesis
2
1,
completely different.
Yes.
Incompatible accounts.
Yeah.
Yes.
So there's always an option that God did it in multiple times, and only the first 2 got caught in the Bible because After that, they were busy writing about other stuff, I guess.
They were off to the races.
Yeah.
To slaughter people and raise cattle and all that sort of stuff. So.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I do like the one quote you read out though, about the eye. How would they know that the eye would be beneficial because they hadn't seen it? Yeah, you can't see.
We're getting there.
You can't see a lot without eyes.
Yes, the very first one that they asked, because I was part of a series of questions. Why would a simple form of life initiate a new organ such as an eye? Yes, why would they? PZ, you're the developmental biologist here. Why would organisms consciously decide to initiate new organs?
Well, there's a fundamental problem with that question. It's that they didn't decide to do this.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So that kind of, that you just have to erase the teleology from this whole line of argumentation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, okay, but as Peter said, how could they know that an eye would be improvement if no one had ever seen before?
Okay. The simplest organism I've seen that has vision is an embryo. I think it's a brachiopod embryo, and it has 2 cells. That's it. So one cell has photosensitive pigments in it, and the other one is full of pigments that just block the light. And it gives the organism a kind of sense of direction of where the light is coming from. That's all you need. And so, then evolution would select for increasing accuracy. That's all it takes.
I think we talked about, I believe it was on this series in a previous episode.
Yeah.
About how I would even say bacteria. There are some bacteria who are photoreceptive, right? They have proteins which, once it's hit by a photon, causes it to conform and then tells some pathway, time to stop doing anaerobic photosynthesis, time to do something else now.
Right. Just the fact that we have bacteria that are capable of photosynthesis tells you that light sensitive molecules are commonplace, and if you find a way to tap into using that for either generating energy or for using as a sensory structure, that's a gain for the organism.
But that had to be God, obviously.
Oh yes.
Clearly.
And the single-celled organisms had to be sitting there planning, what can I do to see what's happening around me?
There is a group of eukaryotes, and I'm drawing a blank on which group they're in, but they're called the Warnowiaceae. They basically refashioned their mitochondria into optical structures, which is very interesting. And so these are unicellular organisms. There are lots of algae that have like pigment granules and stuff like that, which detect the direction of light, which allow them to grow over there, depending on which way the light's coming from. Jellyfish have, or some jellyfish have eyes, like the cubozoans, the box jellyfish. They have their own weirdly complex eyes. Like, why do jellyfish have such complex eyes? What's going on there?
Yeah. And scallops. Why do scallops need so many eyes?
Right.
Why are they such a pretty blue is another question we could ask.
Right. Mollusks just run the whole gambit of eye types, everything from your basically just like photoreceptive surface to your cup eye, your pinhole eye, and then to your full camera eye with like colioids, the squid and octopus. And so yeah, the point. Oh, and so of course we have to mention the famous quote. The way that you know that a creationist has not read Origin of Species is they cite this quote, because literally the next sentence is, "Yet reason tells me," and it's, I don't remember the exact quote, but it's, if there are variations on the eye, and if some of those variations are beneficial, and if those variations are heritable, then the eye can evolve. That's literally the next sentence.
And then the rest of the chapter is a recounting of the empirical observations that have been made of eyes all along that gradient. So, yeah, they haven't read it.
I think it's the wording of the sentence. If they hadn't started out the sentence with "a reason tells me," that probably would have not scared the creationists away. Because reason.
Yeah, that's scary stuff.
Yeah, it's scary.
Yeah. But the structure of that chapter makes so much sense because it's a rebuttal to Paley. So, if you read Paley's Natural Theology, he's got a long section where he talks about all the things that Darwin mentions, but Paley puts it in the context of, hey, there's no way this could have evolved or appeared independently. It all had to be a single unit that was generated all at once. And Darwin is just going through that, and he's saying, no, this is how it could have happened. This is how it does happen.
Yeah, it is. It's very, or there's a lot of poetic justice in that Darwin, it's like slept in Paley's room while at, the college.
Cambridge?
Cambridge. There we go. Cambridge. We have a creationist in the chat. It says, what came first, opsin or... Do you mean retina?
What?
You need both to have function to start the signal transduction pathway? Opsins came way before the retina did.
Or is he talking about retinal?
Or retinal. Okay. Retinal. Yeah.
But then retinal is a relatively simple molecule that could be used in lots of different ways. So...
But yeah, there are lots of different opsins in different organisms. I believe even like coenoflagellates use opsins, don't they? To do group movement. Basically, they like will fold and do curves and stuff based on the direction of light.
Yeah.
So
and then opsins are just a protein that folds up around a molecule of retinal. So it's whoop-de-doo.
So you would say retinal came first and then opsins, or
almost certainly.
Okay.
Yeah. Retinal is just a variant of vitamin. Was it vitamin D? I think.
He says you need vitamin 12 to make retinol.
Yes, but then it's just a product of metabolism.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well. So suffice it to say, there are lots of different visual systems that have evolved, like over 40 times, something like that, in different, in organisms all across the tree of life. So clearly, they're not doing it intentionally. It is whatever mutations happen to produce a protein which is capable of folding in response to light and then just building up from there, basically. So
yes, and I just looked it up. It's a form of vitamin A.
Okay.
So there's where it came from. It's a metabolic precursor, and it just has these interesting properties that it absorbs light in the range of visible wavelengths and undergoes a conformational change. So,
yeah. So, alrighty. Anything else you want to add? Or are we ready for the next section?
Well,
go ahead.
The one thing is, and it's coming up now in the chat. I'm recently saw one respond to a pretty recent video that Michael Behe put out, where he actually still had a mouse trap and said, if I have this mouse trap and I take parts away, all of that was rehashed in Kitzmiller versus Dover. And Miller wore a mouse trap as a tie clip during part of that particular court case. And yet this was in 2005, so we're 17 years later. Behe is still rehashing the thing that was disproven to him in a court case, not just in science.
Peter, they're mad. They're all mad about that still. I mean, Meyer still writes stuff about the Dover trial in his books. Stephen Meyer, I should say. They're all still mad about it. That they didn't, they didn't win there. That theocracy is not happening. Well, I shouldn't speak too soon, I guess. But they didn't win at that time. I'll just say that.
Yeah.
But they're real butthurt about it. Which, I mean, I guess that makes sense. They tried to be all sneaky and everything and be like, no, this isn't just creationism. And then it was very obvious. And then that was it. They floundered.
Yeah.
So, and the funny thing is, despite how loud they are as a group, most anti-evolutionists are young Earth creationists, and nobody reads what they're putting out, right? Like, most anti-evolutionists are not reading Michael Behe. They're not reading Stephen Meyer. They're not reading who else? A Casey Luskin or whoever. They're listening to like videos Kent Hovind puts out or Ken Ham or whoever. It's all young Earth. It's almost all young Earth creationists, pretty much. So
yeah, and when they do read them, it's explicitly to get little nuggets of rationalizations that they can use to counter objections people make.
Right. Like, they love the flagellum argument, for instance. But they're not. But Behe said, at least in Darwin's Black Box, that he accepts universal common ancestry, or at the very least, there was no reason for him to reject it. And he also said the Earth was 4.5 billion years old, and yet they just read it and they go, flagellum argument,
right?
Nab, Kent Hovind, Ken Ham are irrelevant. Maybe you should see who's putting out the most or who's getting the most views related to anti-evolution, because it's
got the most money. Yeah,
it's Kent Hovind and Ken Ham.
Sorry. Kent Hovind, not so much. So if you look at his metric these days, it's probably just atheists hate watching him, because he started a new channel, Dinosaur Adventureland channel, and started doing videos there. And he doesn't get the views. He doesn't get the subscribers. No one is going there, even though he asked all of his... Yes. So I think Kent Hovind is slowly becoming irrelevant. And for those who haven't seen the documentary that McKinnon Mitchell made about Kent Hovind, I strongly urge people to go watch that. And I agree with McKinnon. People shouldn't debate him anymore. People shouldn't pay attention to him anymore, because literally the only people who are now giving Hovind the platform are the atheists. And the moment we stop doing that, that is where probably his money will dry up as well.
Well, I think the only time anybody should go on any of his streams is to repeatedly ask him in the comment section, when did you stop beating your wife?
Or if there's no sound and you have PZ Myers in the chat, because that was one of my favorite videos, where the tech guy's microphone was connected, Kent Hovind's wasn't. PZ was in the chat making fun of everything that was going on screen, and I just sat back and I thought, I'm gonna watch this, and I recorded the whole thing, including the side chat. And it was deleted a couple of hours after it aired.
That's pretty funny.
The kibitzers are always more fun than the creationist debates.
It was that was so much fun.
This guy in the side chat says that archaea and bacteria have different DNA replications, therefore common ancestry is false. But we have the same DNA replication system as Archaeans do, because we are descended from Archaeans, so that supports common ancestry for us and Archaeans. So thanks for making the argument for us, I guess. Anyway,
and that they have different polymerases is So what? It just tells you that these cells have evolved for 4 billion years. So
Right, not even all eukaryotes or all archaeans have exactly the same
right.
sequences for polymerase. Polymerase differs all across the tree of life. There are different mutations and different clades and all that sort of stuff. So that's such a bad argument. All right. Anyway, quote: Darwin tried to explain that evolution produced the eye by many small transitional stages. Evolutionists today say that it was by trial and error, and as one small transition proved advantageous, it was passed along and built upon by later ones. But regardless of what kind of creature we examine, wherever there is an eye, it is complete and not in a transitional stage of development. The facts about living things produce a host of other difficulties. One-celled organisms, such as the amoeba, reproduce asexually. That is, by themselves, they divide into and form. They divide into and form in duplicate. Okay. If asexual reproduction was satisfactory, and it was because such organisms are still with us today, multiplying in exactly the same way, then why would sexual reproduction arise? Ooh, that's actually an interesting question. How could male and female sex organs that perfectly complement each other arise gradually, paralleling each other, yet useless until completed? If the mammary glands in females came about by slow evolution, how did these females feed their offspring in the meantime? If they already had another way to feed them, why develop breasts? And if breasts were developed because they were a superior way of feeding, then why do we still have animals that feed otherwise and survive just as well? The complexity of multicelled organisms caused evolutionist G.S. Carter to say in his book, Animal Evolution, quote, no one can look at the immensely complicated organization of an insect or vertebrate without doubting that our relatively simple theories can completely explain the origin of such complexity. Hold on. No one can look at these organisms without doubting that our theories can explain their complexity. Okay, I misunderstood that. Okay, close quote. Okay, all right. So first, Darwin did say that not in terms of mutations and genes per se, but Darwin did point out that the evolution of traits was by trial and error. Right, organisms are born with variations, and those.
So that bit was a okay summary of
right
how evolution works.
So he says no eyes are in a transitional stage; they're all complete. That's getting kind of a misunderstanding of how evolution works.
Yeah.
No. The eye, for instance, the pinhole eye that nautiluses have, right, doesn't have the lens over the front that,
right.
or sorry, the cornea. It doesn't have all those features that the coleoids have, which allow them better visual acuity. But that's the eye. The pinhole eye is complete for the nautilus. It's an extant modern organism.
Mm-hmm.
It may evolve, some new kind of eye, but it's never like literally half of an eye and then they later evolve the other half. That's never been the case.
It's complete,
and
it's complete in the niche it's in. It's that's the part that I don't get. Why do some animals don't need a better eye? What they have is sufficient for them. If it would be more complex, it would probably become less beneficial because it's easier to hurt, because there's more problems that you can have. So it's going to be less beneficial. Why would it then evolve to a more complex eye if it's not needed? Because that will take up resources you can use for other things.
Yes. And also vision is such a useful sense that, modern eyes, basically the machinery of modern eyes evolved between 600 and 400 million years ago. And so, if you look at things like fish have really good eyes. Some of them have eyes that are better than ours, given the context of their environment. Mm-hmm. So it's like the evolution of the eye reached kind of a pinnacle, and it has sort of been just stable and undergone minor variations over time. So that's, in some ways, it's kind of a bad way to look at the evolution, is because you're picking something that's kind of plateaued out for 400 million years.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It is interesting. But yeah, I don't know. That's just such an interesting misconception that, what do they expect when they're saying there are no transitional stages of development? Well, what would they expect a transitional stage to look like? And of course, they don't have an answer for that. They've never conceived of what a transitional organism would ever look like, except for the crocoduck, of course.
I'm a little bit distracted with, so the theist in the side chat just said
he's kind of boring.
Yeah, he just said that believing in the great juju up the mountain is more rational than not believing in a deity at all.
He's just throwing out a whole bunch of weird little canards. Like I said, the difference between Archaea and Eukaryotes are huge. I mean, sure, there are differences. One has a nucleus and one doesn't. There are different metabolic differences between them, but that's not what I said. I said their DNA replication machinery was the same. So, and he's just saying, yeah, he's boring. Whatever. I'm not paying him any more attention. So yeah, so clearly creationists never conceive of what an intermediate stage would look like, because if they did, then they could potentially give us a falsifiable idea, right? If we said, they say, what good is half a wing? Right. Well, okay. Tell us what you think half a wing would look like. Maybe we can find an organism that has half a wing according to your definition. Well, they'll never do that, because you show them something like Archaeopteryx or Microraptor or Sinornithosaurus or what have you, which has the the half a wing, and there you go. So, the other thing he says, which is why they'll give us these bizarre, monstrous chimeras like the crocoduck, which is represents a fundamental misunderstanding of how, or series of misunderstandings about how evolution works. Which, PZ, I don't know if you've read The Rocks Were There by RJ and me, but
yes.
Georgia. Oh, you did? Oh, fantastic!
Yeah.
Well, then you'll probably remember. Anybody who hasn't read it might not know, but maybe you should pick up the book. Georgia Purdom, who is a geneticist, she's done cancer research, was a geneticist at one point, said that, or she at least signed her name on a paper that said cats and dogs don't share a common ancestor because there are no cat dogs in the fossil record. Now, Dapper and I did a series, and Peter hosted, of course, in which we discussed transitional carnivore morphs like Dormaliscion and Hesperocyon, all these other guys, and point out, no, that's not how evolution works. We don't expect cats and dogs, which are modern organisms, to interbreed and produce hybrids, and that's what the common ancestor of their clades look like. Nope. Okay, he says nobody knows what transition from Archaea to Eukaryotes would look like. Actually, there are lots of papers that describe that very process of how endosymbiosis happened, and in extreme detail. Dapper and I showed a paper in which that was discussed. So that's a lie. He says, or the book says, organisms. What is this? He says that amoebas reproduce asexually. As far as I'm aware, most amoebas reproduce sexually. Maybe some reproduce asexually, but I'm pretty sure most of them do sexually. Do you agree with that?
I'm not an expert on those single-celled things, but yeah, that strikes a chord. That's kind of what I remember.
Because if I remember correctly, because the reason John Maynard Smith called the class of rotifers Deloidia an evolutionary scandal was it was the largest taxonomic rank of asexually reproducing organisms or eukaryotes. And so, yeah, there are probably species of amoebas that reproduce sexually, maybe, or reproduce asexually, sorry. But I'm pretty sure they largely as a group reproduce sexually. I'm pretty sure. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure on that. Nobody has ever observed a speciation event. Procambarus virginalis, 1990s. Oh my gosh, a gene duplication event which caused a diploid species to become triploid, resulting in a bacteria remain bacteria. All right, you're done. Goodbye. You're done. Goodbye. Sorry. That was boring. So it does ask actually an interesting question. And that is, why does sex exist? If asexual reproduction works, why does sex exist? And that's actually a very interesting question. PZ, do you have any insights into that?
Well, it's for recombination, right? Isn't that the accepted model? That yeah, and so we yeast have different sexes.
Mm-hmm.
I forget how many they've got, but it's more than two.
Right. It's like
And
hundreds, isn't it? Something like that.
yeah, and the whole purpose is you got to have markers so that you don't breed with your brother or sister or whatever you call an asexual organism like that. But yeah, so it's a mechanism for excluding certain individuals from mating with you and encouraging the generation of new varieties.
Yeah, absolutely. There are some really interesting experiments with snails down in New Zealand, or up in New Zealand. Direction's not real. Over in New Zealand. And what these researchers do is they look at the parasite load within these populations of snails, and they find that the ones that reproduce sexually have fewer parasites than the ones that reproduce asexually.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's that whole ecological benefit to reproducing sexually. As you said, you have recombination, so you have this monumental amount of genetic variation, which prevents nematodes and cystodes and all these other harmful parasites from attacking you.
It makes your progeny a moving target, so there's clearly an advantage to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Interestingly, I've read, and maybe you've heard something different, but I've read that meiosis originally arose as a DNA repair mechanism. So maybe that was its.
Yeah, that sounds perfectly reasonable. Okay. I mean, because if you look at the details of meiosis, it's just an elaboration on mitosis, with the key thing being that pairing of homologous chromosomes. And you can see where, hey, that would be a good way to repair errors, is if you bring in two homologs, line them up next to each other, and then do a little bit of splicing and swapping and cleaning up. So sure.
Yeah. Well, so it may have had that function originally, but it also had the added benefit of generating lots and lots of variation, so you can outpace your competitors. So,
mm-hmm. Yeah. So the whole thing about different alleles in an individual is kind of not acknowledged as much as it should be. That being able to recombine means that what you're doing is swapping in and out tested components, molecules that work in certain contexts, and you put them in different combinations, and you can get quite a bit of power out of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Another sort of interesting question, but I think he phrased, and I'm assuming it's a he. It could have been a she, but I've just been saying he this whole time. How can male and female sex organs that complement each other gradually arise? Do you have some insight into that?
That's the Ray Comfort argument.
Right.
Yeah. I've been hit with that so many times, where Ray Comfort says, well, you create the first male. It's always the males first.
Right.
And then he has to sit around waiting for thousands of generations for females to evolve. And it doesn't work that way. that early sexual reproduction, that it was just a difference in the molecular surfaces of the gametes. But if you take those yeast and you look at what's the equivalent of gametes in them, they're identical except for their labels on their surface.
Right.
And then there was kind of an exploitive specialization where some individuals produce those cheap, numerous, fast-moving gametes, and others produce the fully invested, large gametes.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where the differences are starting to come from. And then, of course, you look at modern organisms, and they don't have, a lot of them do not have the differences in genitals that are so obvious between people.
Right.
Yeah. So
they don't have X and Y chromosomes either.
Right.
Between the males and females. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you had to say which was more sophisticated, it's not us. It's things like insects, arthropods that have
right,
that.
with haplodiploidy and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah. And also with the lock and key genitals that they only fit into members of their same species. And yeah.
Yeah. I think I am reminded of a video of yours, a lecture you gave, which I've watched, I think, like 10 times. And that's a few things I've learned from creationists.
Which how do you stay awake through it?
Hands down, I think my favorite talk that you've ever given, my favorite debate you've ever been in was the one with Jerry Bergman, because it was just so funny to watch.
That was ridiculous. That wasn't.
It was very funny. I really enjoyed it. I have not watched that one 10 times. I watched it once and I said, okay.
Yeah.
But in your debate, because you mentioned Ray Comfort, in your lecture, because Ray asked you, well, where did the first female dog come from after the male had been around, and you went through the trouble of explaining to him that actually sexual reproduction way precedes caniforms. And then he said, well, what about elephants? And you left off by saying, I'm afraid to mention that plants do sex also.
Yeah. There's always this assumption that every feature of the organism evolves specifically at that instant in the appearance of the organism itself. And no, right. we have pretty much the same stuff, the same doohickeys as other apes. So
right,
not really any innovations there. Sorry.
Yeah. And interestingly, because you mentioned anisogamy and oogamy. So for anybody wondering, you have isogamy, where the gametes, or whatever you want to call them, are essentially the same. They basically look the same, except for, as you mentioned, the the outside might have slightly different receptors, and that's how you tell the difference. And then you have anisogamy, where one is slightly larger than the other, and it's usually the equivalent of the egg. Female's egg is larger than the equivalent of the sperm. And then oogamy, where you have really big differences between them. So for animals are oogamous. We have really big eggs and then really teeny tiny sperm cells. And the sperm just carry genetic material. And that's pretty much it. So,
right. And the fundamental difference between them is the amount of investment by the parents in their offspring. Mm-hmm. That, if you have great big eggs, that means somebody is packing that egg with all kinds of energy and information and good stuff to work with. And lots of organisms don't do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. The little zygote, once it's produced, it's kind of on its own. Got to quickly get to a point where you can start consuming things in the environment. And
yeah, it's interesting. Like all the broadcast spawners, everybody just throws their gametes into the water and hopes for the best, basically.
And that works. It does work for those organisms. And meanwhile, human beings, we just have these little parasites that sit there leeching off their mother for months and months, and then they start leeching off both parents for years and years and years.
You mentioned parasites, and I started thinking about the anglerfish of the order Ceratoidea, where the males are the researchers who were studying anglerfish kept pulling up females, And they were like, why can we never find any males of this order? Well, turns out the males were there all along. They're just stuck to the female.
Right.
It's like a little scale on the female side. That was all it was.
Yeah, and I've been finding as I've been collecting spiders, for instance, that mainly what I find is female spiders. And why do you think that is? Yeah, males are on a one-way trip. One courtship is all they get.
Well,
yeah.
What you just said reminds me of a neighbor I had once when you said about the leeching off of. He actually told the entire street that why do people have children? Because he had worked it out. He had calculated what the costs were. And by the time they leave your house at 18, provided they leave at that time, you have spent so much money on them, you could buy a second house. So why would you have kids when you can have a second house?
You could get much more than that. I put 3 kids through college, so I'm just...
no.
Yeah, so...
We're promoting antinatalism out here.
Yeah.
Why have children when you can have money? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the kids do have some benefits. They do have some...
As a TA, I pay for myself, basically. My classes are... so I pay originally the amount, and then because I'm a TA for a couple classes, a botany lab. Well, this past semester was a botany lab, and which I do every semester, and the Bio 101 lab, which was a trip. That was a trip. So my classes, they just send me the money back. They're like, all right, here you go. Here's your whatever $3,000 back for this semester. So, which is nice. It's very nice.
I should have told my kids, you got a TA.
I don't understand why everyone doesn't do it. I mean, you get your money back. I don't get it. I don't know.
Well, like my university would not do it because we brag about how every class is taught by a professor. So for marketing purposes, you sometimes don't want to follow that strategy.
Okay. I mean, I can see that. It's just when I went to LSU, because I was at LSU Baton Rouge first before I came to LSU Shreveport. And at LSU Baton Rouge, the TAs just full on teach the labs. You don't see the professor for the labs. And so when I came to LSU Shreveport, I was basically expecting that. And then they were like, oh no, it's the professor, and then like you're his helper.
Yep. That's the way it is here.
Okay. I mean, I still get paid, right? Yep. All right. That's good with me.
Oh, well, yeah, we pay our students something close to minimum wage, $10 and something.
Yeah,
maybe it's up to 11 something now, but yeah.
You guys have $11 minimum wage? Holy crap!
Well,
we have like $7.25 down here.
Yeah, it's partly set by the institution, and so we kind of like our students, and if we can afford to, we'd give them a little more money.
Right. I mean, that is a problem for small universities. Like LSUS is a smaller university, and so it's everything is like, piecemeal trying to expand because it's so prohibitively expensive to do anything. So he mentions mammary glands, which is also another like indirectly interesting question. I feel like he asks a lot of interesting questions, but doesn't really want the answers to them.
Right.
So from what I understand, mammary glands evolved. Well, I mean, monotremes, obviously. Mammary glands evolved while mammals were still laying eggs. So some of their nutrition while they're developing is coming from the yolk. And then once they hatch, they're suckling on mother. And so basically what mammals did, on the Therian line is they just got rid of the egg step and stepped up the milk production step, basically. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, then also the milk production step. That's, mammary glands are modified sebaceous glands. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of disgusting if you think about it. That oily stuff in your hair that if you don't shampoo regularly, that's all these oils are secreted by sebaceous glands in there. Just take those and crank them up to 11 and have them pumping out all kinds of goo.
Tasty stuff.
Yeah, that's where it starts.
Yeah.
Is basically modified sweat and sebaceous glands producing fluids, and then mammals just started enriching that material, so putting other nutrients in there as well as just oils and salts and stuff. And so that's where it came from. And then, of course, other organisms took a different route. So some birds make crop milk, for instance. So they're regurgitating an enriched solution into their babies' mouths.
Delicious.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
Good greasy vomit. It just fills you with an appetite, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I'm so glad I ate before we did the show. No.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, breasts were developed because they were superior. Well, that's kind of the thing is they keep saying everything is upward and it's better and it's superior, and that's not how evolution works. Evolution is not about. I mean, evolution is about what works, right? What is most likely to allow you to reach reproductive age and have more offspring than the next guy. But that's not upward. It's not superior per se. Is if your way works, then it works. It's whatever works, right?
Right. And what other animal produces a lesser milk than we do? I mean, that's what he's arguing. But you look at all the other mammals around, and they're all producing milk for their young, and it's just as good as ours for their purposes.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and then of course, if you're going to talk about mammary glands, I think some creationists may have the idea that larger breasts is superior, and it's not, as far as milk production goes. So that's another epiphenomenon that they're focused on.
I think we may have lost Jackson, or he's holding very, very still. That's also possible, but I don't think so.
I started talking about breasts and his brain exploded.
And he completely froze. When you said bigger breasts, that's where he froze. So I'm not entirely sure what's going on, but
okay, I better stay off that topic. Right?
Jackson, if you can hear us, you should maybe refresh because you're entirely frozen.
Oh, he's coming back in slow-mo.
Yeah.
All herky-jerky and everything. Okay.
Yeah, it's a problem with this internet. This has happened before, so usually it only happens at the end of the show. I'm not sure why it's happening early today, but
this is a consequence of living in an undeveloped country like Louisiana.
Yes,
that must be it.
I mean, it's still mind-boggling that even internet is a thing where you don't have that all over the U.S. Okay, so there we go.
Oh,
sorry about that.
He's moving again. Jackson, when PZ mentions big breasts, don't immediately go on a webpage and try and see what they look like, because that's going to eat up
Peter, I was just gonna show the audience what we were referring to. Obviously,
yes,
it's for educational purposes.
Research.
You want to get demonetized?
Research.
I think that's a good idea.
Research purposes, right?
Yes.
Exactly. I also and the last thing on this section is this evolutionist G.S. Carter says that insects and vertebrates are immensely complicated, and relatively simple theories cannot explain the origin of such complexity. Does that sound like an evolutionist to you guys?
Run that by me again. So
he says that insects and vertebrates are immensely complicated, and relatively simple theories cannot explain the origin of such complexity.
Relatively simple theories like creationism? That's true.
Yeah.
Well, he's an evolutionist. So he must be saying natural selection, I guess. I've never heard of him, this G.S. Carter.
Okay, I'm looking him up.
Animal Evolution is the name of his book.
Oh, is this the same? I don't know. I found.
And it's an evolutionist who said that you cannot come up with a simple theory to explain
evolution this? Can't explain. Yeah, evolution can't explain this apparently, according to evolutionist. So, you know.
Wait, what can't they explain? That's the part I'm missing is
the complexity.
It says the immense complexity. 59. Yeah. G.S. Carter's 1954 book, Animal Evolution.
Okay. Well,
I'm afraid to do anything on my computer because I might kill it again.
I'm looking it up.
It's like saying that if I give you a pen and you can only make one stroke a day, over time you won't be able to draw a complex drawing, because that probably wouldn't happen. You can only do one stroke a day.
Uh-huh.
I found the book, and it's only $5. How about that? Oh. By G.S. Carter, Animal Evolution. And is there anything about? No, there's nothing written about it. Okay. Well,
and it's old, 1950s. You don't want to waste your time with that.
Yeah, that's. Well, I mean, for them, this was cutting edge, because it was 1967. Yeah. At any rate,
for a lot of creationists, I mean, Kent Hovind, that is still cutting edge, because he's citing stuff that is much, 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 much older, and thinks that is still relevant.
All right, so.
Well, and it's written by a guy who would have been working through the Neo-Darwinian synthesis, so maybe it has some interesting things to say in a historical sense. But
I think I only need to read one paragraph from the next subchapter for you to get an idea of what it says, because I'm reading it right now, and it's the same argument over and over and over and over and over. So I'm just going to read one paragraph, and then that'll give you an idea of it. Then we'll move to the next chapter. How does that sound?
That sounds lovely. Okay.
All right. What is made requires a maker. I don't even really have to read the paragraph. You already got the idea. But all of man's knowledge and experience demonstrate that the more complicated a mechanism is, the more intelligent is its maker. We even attribute very crude instruments to a maker. When we see an old Indian arrowhead in a museum, do we ever say it evolved? Do we not acknowledge that it was made by someone? Would anyone declare that a space satellite in orbit around the Earth got there when a chance coordination of metal molecules formed a capsule on Earth, which just happened to be connected to an evolved rocket and fuel tank, and that all of this just chanced to go into perfect orbit without any directing intelligence? We acknowledge a maker of it. Close quote.
Yes, the premise is what's being questioned here. The premise that the only way you can make something complicated is with a designer. That's what he's supposed to be telling us, demonstrating to us. But why can't I just catch a housefly, for instance, and say, look, this thing is amazingly complicated, but it wasn't designed. It was created by a mother fly, so that's pretty low, right? So why are you telling me that the only way you can make something sophisticated is by a more sophisticated designer? Clearly, that's not true.
Right. And I mean, this is the watchmaker argument. That's all this is.
Right.
Yep. The problem, it was Matt Dillahunty, I think, who made the point that the issue with the watchmaker argument is everything is a watch to the people who make the watchmaker arguments. Yes. It's a watch on a beach of watches, on a planet of watches, and a universe of watches, right? How do you look at anything and say, okay, this is not a watch. This was not designed. This was natural processes. Well, maybe for rocks and stuff, they can do that. They can say, oh, this was an avalanche that caused this, whatever. But they can't do that with living organisms. Right. They have no way to delineate a non-designed feature from a designed feature, which if they have, they're supposed to have some sort of model that describes the, all life on Earth, all biodiversity. Why don't they have that? Why can they not delineate design from non-design? Could it
Yep.
Could it be none of it was designed? Could that be a possibility?
That sounds reasonable to me. That's the simplest explanation so far.
Yeah.
And there's also the problem that if you have a designer, whenever you come up with a new design, you start from scratch. This is the thing that the Hovind will always say, okay, the lug nuts of a Pontiac will fit a Chevy because they all have the same designer. They're not they may have a similar designer, but they're not basing the 2022 Chevy off of the Ford Model T and then working from there and trying to tinker with everything in order to make it modern. You design the entire car from scratch all over again when it comes to a completely new model. And that is not what we see with the designer in nature, apparently, because he's building off of the previous model and improving and improving and improving. That's how that works. So either the designer is shit or there's no designer.
And you should have some pity for this poor designer who has to design every single individual lug nut for everything separately.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. The watchmaker argument is truly terrible. First, because of the impossibility of delineating design from non-design elements, apparently, but also we have mechanisms by which complexity happens, by which novel features can arise, all that sort of stuff, and so we have no need to invoke designers in nature. The one of the favorite examples that I like to go to is the Richard Lenski Coli experiment. Right, you had a tandem duplication of this region, which under anaerobic conditions metabolizes citrate. Well, because this duplication happened and then put them end to end, the section got put under the control of a promoter, which is only operated under aerobic conditions, and now this region, which was previously only anaerobically turned on, can now be turned on under aerobic conditions. So that's a novel phenotype that didn't exist before, right? And that was just because of a duplication, and transposition. So,
which doesn't require any sophisticated, intelligent designer to have occur.
Right. Exactly. Do you have a favorite example of like a mutation that caused a novelty or something like that?
But they all did.
Of like a some example that is like a go-to for you when you're trying to explain like the concept of evolutionary novelties or something like that.
Yeah, the one I really like the argument from the glucocorticoid and mineral corticoid evolution. That we can model the ancestral receptor, the one that was present in fish ages ago. And then the thing is that we land-based vertebrates, we split that design into two, one for osmotic balance of minerals, the others for glucocorticoid purposes, modulating sugar consumption and so forth. But you can trace them back to one molecule, and it's only a handful of nucleotides that changed between them. So we can see that and see that it's, that's how you get innovations, is these little things that separated salt balance from sugar maintenance.
Yeah, absolutely. I believe hemoglobin, this is the same story, right?
Right.
The alpha and beta chains, right? Like are descended from the same region, which got duplicated and diverged.
Yeah, and the funny thing is you can look at that structure in the chromosome itself, and it's one of the most densely packed regions of the chromosome for protein coding sequences, and they're all just variants of the globin sequence. they're all right next to each other. So it was not a huge duplication. It was, one little region is copy. Oh, let's copy this a little bit here and a little bit there and a little bit there. And you can also find pseudogenes in there where they made a copy and it didn't work and it just died off and was gradually mutating away.
Nice. I read a paper a while back, it's been a few months now, but it was about these pseudogenes in Afrotheres. So they're called, I think it was LAF is the name of this pseudogene family. So all mammals have like a few of these pseudogenes, but in Afrotheres, they duplicated them a whole bunch of times. And in elephants, they actually refunctionalized a couple of the pseudogenes.
Uh-huh.
So they got put under some promoter, and now they have function again, or a few of them did. So, which I thought was really interesting. But yeah, so
yeah.
Do we have any more thoughts or opinions on that? Are we ready to move to the fossil record chapter?
Oh boy, what kind of a mess are they going to make of that?
oh boy. Let's. Well, it starts with. Oh god, it starts with the Cambrian.
That's going to be a short one because there is no fossil record. I've been told that by
of course.
Right.
Of course.
Some guy from, I think he's from Alabama right now.
Yeah.
Actually, it is a pretty short chapter overall. So.
See, told you. There is no fossil record.
I mean, but it mentions the Cambrian explosion on the next page, so I'm probably going to have an aneurysm. We'll get to that. All right, here we go. What does the fossil record show? Chapter 4. Quote: if living things evolve from one-celled organisms into higher forms of animal and plant life.
Already we're off to a bad start.
Then we would expect to see evidence of this in the fossil record. Surely, some of those earliest forms left either their fossils, their imprints, or other evidences in the earth. What does the fossil record show? Over a century ago, the record disturbed even Charles Darwin. He wrote of this in his book, The Origin of Species. Quote, there is another and allied difficulty which is much more serious. I allude to the manner in which species belonging to several of the main divisions of the animal kingdom suddenly appear in the lowest known fossiliferous rocks. If the theory be true, it is indisputable that before the lowest Cambrian stratum was deposited, long periods elapsed, as long as, or probably far longer than, the whole interval from the Cambrian age to the present day, and that during these vast periods the world swarmed with living creatures. To the question why we do not find rich fossiliferous deposits belonging to these assumed earliest periods prior to the Cambrian system, I can give no satisfactory answer. The difficulty of assigning any good reason for the absence of vast piles of strata rich in fossils beneath the Cambrian system is very great. Close quote. So first, I want to point out Darwin was right that before the Cambrian was longer than the period from the Cambrian to today. So he was right about that. Mm-hmm. But also, a bit of a historical note, what Darwin referred to as the Cambrian was actually the Silurian. The Cambrian is before that, historically. Darwin was looking at the Silurian, or with the geologist Darwin was referencing, we're looking at the Silurian rock, and it turned out that Cambrian strata was actually older than that. So the Cambrian lasted from about 541 to about 485 million years ago. And, drawing a blank on the Silurian. Let's look it up, folks, because I am drawing a blank. Silurian was 443 to 419 million years ago. Okay. So more or closer in time to us. But in Darwin's day, of course, there weren't many known fossils. Just at all. The term dinosaur was only invented like 17 years before Origin of Species was published. Something like that, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Although Darwin was very happy in his own lifetime with the fossils that were discovered. I think we mentioned them in the last episode, like Archaeopteryx, which was found in 1861, just 2 years after the first version of Origin of Species.
And Neanderthal?
Neanderthals, yeah. Halotherium was an early Saurinian, which still possessed back legs. He was aware of Basilosaurus and the other one that people typically reference. Can't remember. But also had hind limbs still, these very rudimentary hind limbs, but hind limbs nonetheless. So Darwin was quite happy with what little evidence from the fossils he had. What are your thoughts?
Well, also Darwin, unlike these creationists in these books, I acknowledge that the fossil record was going to be very, very spotty, that you weren't going to have a continuous series of everything preserved in the fossil record. And that was his primary explanation, was the incomplete nature of the fossils that we have. And that's why we don't have this continuous record. But of course, the creationists keep telling us that, oh yeah, we would expect to see continuous record of all these different forms. Nope.
I do want to point out that there's a really good book by Donald Prothero. It's titled Evolution, What the Fossils Say and Why It Matters. And while we don't have perfect records for the vast majority of organisms on this planet, either because they're soft-bodied or they just suck at getting fossilized, there are things called foraminifera and diatoms and radiolarians and coccolithophorus who leave near perfect fossil records, and they never get talked about by creationists. Why do you think that is?
Because they're just foraminifera, that they just gave rise to more foraminifera, so who cares? They never evolved into something else.
I guess that's true.
It's variation, Jackson. It's variation, not evolution. You're conflating the two.
Oh,
right.
Yes.
Yeah. There's also a vertebrate, or a couple of vertebrates, Hyopsodus and Haplomylus, which there's a paper by Philip Gingrich who predominantly does whale evolution research. But he also was arguing with Stephen Jay Gould back when they first proposed, he and Eldridge first proposed a punctuate equilibrium. And he was like, look, if you get close enough, if you look hard enough at the fossil record, it's gradual, which wasn't what they were arguing. They were like, yeah, gradualism happens. But yeah. This paper that Gingrich did, which I think was in 1985, showed in the Green River Formation, you have Hyopsodus, and you can actually trace their very gradual morphological trajectory over like a couple million years. It's a very interesting paper. What else was there? Oh, ceratopsians. Actually, the record of large ceratopsians, like the relatives of Triceratops, those guys, some of them have such good fossil records, you can actually see anagenesis happening. There's a paper, and Dapper and I talked about it when we were talking about the Cretaceous, how there's this, I think it's in like Western United States, how you have like one species, and then you go up in the record, and their horn's slightly different, their frill is slightly different, and you go up a little bit more, and it's slightly more different, and you go up a little bit more, and it's even more different. And you can just trace this all the way up the column for like several million years. So.
But to raise an objection, if they can't even tell which ones are male and female, how do they know it?
I mean, yeah. When was the first male Triceratops in the record, and where was the first female Triceratops?
And you can't prove that they had any kids. So.
Except for like a couple ichthyosaur fossils, but
yeah, that will give him birth.
But even in those, the kids are dead and fossilized too. So they left no grandchildren even.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Peter, you brought up in a previous episode how there were oviraptors which like brooded their nests and had their arms out like spread over their eggs. I was actually reading a paper about that just the other day.
The half a wing idea.
They also and they're perched. They're literally sitting on their eggs, and they were killed by a falling sand dune. We have like City Patty and Nemegtomia and all these other, which is so funny. It's an oviraptor. Oviraptor means egg thief, and there's an oviraptor called Nemegtomia, which means mother from Nemegt, which is in Mongolia. So I guess they're their public image has been rehabilitated over the past 100 years. So,
Oviraptors were slandered from the very beginning.
right.
But
not Meiosis. You know,
weren't they also the ones that laid their eggs in twos? And then Ian Juby produced a nest where they were laid in twos in a circle. And then he had another nest where they were laid in twos in a straight line, which proved the flood because now they were laying their eggs on the run.
Well, they laid their eggs in layers.
I'm not kidding.
Like you laid the first like circle, and then you lay another circle around that.
No, but these
I don't know about
these. Were distinctly. He had a nest which where the eggs were in pairs in a circle, and then he had another nest where they were in pairs but in a straight line, and those were evidence of the flood because this animal didn't have time to make a perfect circle because the flood was coming, and so it laid its eggs on the run. He actually made that statement in one of Carl Baugh's shows, which, having
to lay eggs as you ran would slow you down quite a bit.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, if you're running from like rushing water, you're probably going to want to just keep going because if you have to stop,
Keep in mind, this water was moving so fast it cut out Grand Canyon. Yet this animal still had time to lay his eggs in pairs.
Yeah, well, I mean, Ian Juby may not be the brightest bulb in all of young Earth creationism, which I mean, we're talking young Earth creationism, so the bar is already low, and he put the bar in the floor. So
I'm really happy that he has found a new purpose. He's now a train spotter, which he's probably a lot better at than
train spotter.
Yes, he now has a channel where he goes along old train tracks and talks about how the trains used to run there and which kind of trains. And
you know what? Unironically, I'm actually happy for him. I'm glad he's doing something else besides.
I didn't know this, but I forgot what the reason was. But someone on Twitter tweeted something, and then I thought I need to find the clip where he was shooting his own boat to disprove evolution, because if something went wrong, and he kept shooting his rubber boat. It was fake. Obviously, he was just sitting in front of a green screen. But he started out with a pistol, and then with an automatic rifle, kind of AK, started shooting all over the place. And I couldn't find that clip, so I did a search on YouTube, which is how I discovered. And he used to do train videos before he did his.
Really?
Was Wazulu videos. He started out as Wazulu and then became Ian Juby, the young Earth creationist, and now he's back to trains again.
I'm happy for him.
Yes.
I'm glad he's probably doing something where fewer people laugh at him.
He's probably
Has he figured out how trains evolved yet?
I don't know. It's apparently it's doing the work, the Lord's work. Going over disused train tracks.
Wasn't it Potholer 54 who did the Nephilim Freeze Insane video where like at the very end Nephilim's holding like a pistol to the camera, and that's like the very end of the video? I think that was Potholer 54. Which PZ, in case you were unaware, Nephilim Free made a 9-hour video about me.
I saw that. I did not watch it, however.
I did look it up.
I'll never watch it.
I did look it up.
I have no
and
desire.
I started playing it, and then I put it on 1.5 speed, and then I put it on double speed, and it still was too slow to listen to until guests came in who started speaking faster than he does.
Right.
And the amount of dead air in the first, at least in the first part, I didn't watch the whole thing. I just skipped through it
No, I wouldn't expect anyone. I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy.
No,
You know,
no.
that video. I can't imagine being online in a single sitting for 9 hours. That's incomprehensible to me. So anyway.
I did a 10-hour sitting.
Jesus.
Not too long ago. I bumped into a Christian who said, I have a video on my channel, which is, I think it was, he claimed it was half an hour. It turned out to be 45 minutes. He said, if you watch that, you're going to be a Christian. And I took him up on that. I said, I'm going to watch this, and tomorrow we're going to go over your video. Going over those 45 minutes took us 10 hours. And over...
He really sat with you for the whole 10 hours.
Yes, and over those 10 hours, Christians came in and sided with me. I'm not kidding.
That's amazing.
Yes.
Oh my god, that's amazing. What was it? What's his name? Mr. ID. The longest stream before I saw this one was Mr. ID did like an 8-hour stream one time. But I just love the idea that like these creationists who I never interact with, like Nephilim and Standing and these other guys, are like putting out videos about me that I'll never watch because I don't go to their channels. Someone actually posted the Nephilim free video on Twitter when it first came out and was like, Jackson, have you seen this? And I was like, no, because I don't look at his channel. But it's amazing to me that there are people who hate me so much that they're doing this out there. I kind of like it. It honestly gives my ego a big boost. So anyway, I'm sure PZ, you've had your fair share of videos like that.
Nothing of that length though. So you win the contest here. Although I do have to point out that we're planning to talk for 2 hours here. And
yes,
you've got a series of these, so this is gonna be more than 10 hours in total once you get all.
I mean, that's fair. That is fair. I guess we can also move on to our next point. Okay.
I wasn't trying to hurry you along.
Oh no, that's fine. We do need to move along. But you're right. I mean the video with Dapper, so each one was 2 hours, and we did like 6 parts. So that's a total of 12 hours that I did, right? Something like that. Anyway.
just about.
Quote: the Cambrian layer of Earth mentioned by Darwin is said by evolutionists to be about 600 million years old. It's not too far off.
Well, yeah, but not quite.
Yeah, in the 60s, it's not too bad. In Darwin's day, the fossil record of the Precambrian layers was a blank. Now, after more than 100 years of intensive investigation, what do the facts show? The New York Times of October 25th, 1964, in an article supporting evolution, admits that period is still a blank. Quote, the chief puzzle in the record of life's history on Earth, the sudden appearance some 600 million years ago of most basic divisions of the plant and animal kingdoms. There is virtually no record of how these divisions came about. Thus, the entire first part of evolutionary history is missing. Close quote. The same admission is made by the book The World We Live In. Quote, for at least 3/4 of the Book of Ages engraved in the Earth's crust, for at least 3/4 of the Book of Ages engraved in the Earth's crust, the pages are blank. Okay, sorry. Close quote. Note also what Scientific American of August 1964 says. That's a long quote. Quote, both the sudden appearance and the remarkable composition of the animal life characteristic of Cambrian times are sometimes explained away or overlooked by biologists. Yet recent paleontological research has made the puzzle of the sudden proliferation of living organisms increasingly difficult for anyone to evade. These animals were neither primitive nor generalized in anatomy. That's not right. They were complex organisms that clearly belonged to the various distinct phyla, or major groups of animals, now classified as metazoan. In fact, they are now known to include representatives of nearly every major phylum that possess skeletal structures capable of fossilization. Yet before the Lower Cambrian, there is scarcely a trace of them. The appearance of the Lower Cambrian fauna can reasonably be called a sudden event. What one can no longer dismiss this event by assuming that all Precambrian rock has been greatly altered by time to allow the fossils ancestral to the Cambrian. One can no longer dismiss this event by assuming that all Precambrian rocks have been too greatly altered by time to allow the fossils ancestral to the Cambrian Metazoans to be preserved, even if all the Precambrian ancestors of the Cambrian Metazoans were similarly soft-bodied and therefore rarely preserved. Far more abundant traces of their activity should have been found in the Precambrian strata than has proved to be the case. Neither can the general failure to find Precambrian animal fossils be charged to any lack of trying. Close quote. So Stephen Meyer, don't know if you guys have heard of him. I know a couple of us here have.
Yeah.
His arguments, which he still pushes today in the year of our Lord 2022, were formed back in the 1960s also. So there you have it. He's also just pushing this garbage. Actually, I'll let you go first, PZ. What do you have to say to that?
Well, it's clearly been falsified because we found all these fossils from before that period and within the Cambrian. So it's kind of a silly argument to have to refute now. Because, and also I'd point out that the fossils we do find from these areas are found in Lagerstätte. So it's like, yeah, they were soft-bodied, they were small. You had to have specific rare circumstances in which they would fossilize. And so you didn't find them very often, but when you do, you find lots of examples, like the Burgess Shale, for instance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So I wrote a large portion of the script, pretty much all of the Cambrian stuff for, well, if you guys want to see my essential full rebuttal to this garbage argument, highly recommend that you watch Professor Dave's response to Stephen Meyer, because I wrote most of that script, especially the part about the Cambrian. I wrote a bit about the genetics part of that too, but the Cambrian stuff is pretty much all mine. Because we've done so many videos on this channel about the Cambrian explosion. I've done videos on the Cambrian explosion on other people's channels. I've written scripts about the Cambrian explosion on other people's channels. And I was kind of like, I want this to be the last one that I write. I want it to be so comprehensive, so full on how, what the Cambrian fossils are, what the Precambrian fossils are, how genetics fits into all of this, and Hox genes and all that, so that I never have to write this argument again. I can just refer anyone back to that video because I'm tired of making it. But the funny thing is, the 60s, I believe, like the very first Precambrian organisms were found in the late 60s, weren't they?
I know it was somewhere in the 60s. I'm not sure exactly when.
But they weren't so they were first being described in I think it was the late 60s, maybe earlier, maybe slightly earlier, but nobody really did intense stratigraphic analyses of them until I think the 70s maybe, and then they were like, oh, these are Precambrian organisms, and then nobody really knew what they were, however, until the past couple of decades. So really the 90s, not even really the 90s, early 2000s to today basically is when we've really sort of solidified that these are metazoans. These are stem animals, stem bilaterians. They're not lichens, as Gregory Redelac likes to argue for some weird reason. They're not fungi. They're not independently multicellular protists. They're animals. Dickinsonia was a stem bilaterian. Kimberella was like a stem spiralian. Hautia is an idarian. Eulingia, Namacalathus, Icaria. We have lots and lots and lots of Precambrian fossils nowadays, as you said. So this argument is just totally moot. Just completely moot.
The distressing thing, though, is that this means that our knowledge of the Ediacaran and Cambrian eras is younger than I am.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. Yeah, I guess.
Yeah. Oh, man.
How does that make you feel? Oh, wait, how does that make you feel?
You just had to rub it in, didn't you? Yeah.
I mean, it's in fairness, our I mean, it's like genomics and like epigenetics are stuff that are been, are like within my lifetime, or stuff that started before I was born, obviously, but really they've taken off within my lifetime, So
Yeah.
science moves fast,
Faster than me, anyway. Yeah.
Didn't someone say science moves by funerals? Wasn't that a line?
Oh, right. Yeah, but I'm not dead yet. So
I think that line more referred to though was like the people who were like holding back a field because they were like, this is my idea, and I'm kind of like Alan Fiducia, who we were talking about earlier.
yeah, we're just waiting for him to die. Is that what you're saying?
Not in those
That's
words
cool.
per se.
Yeah.
We're waiting for Alan Fiducia to die. Jackson 2022. No. Yeah. The one of the cool things that I read this really interesting paper. I think it was Zaravlev and Wood, either 2019 or 2020, one of those. But they wrote about how the trace fossil record of bilaterians increases from the late Ediacaran into the early Cambrian, and then continues this sort of stepwise pattern as you go higher up through the Cambrian strata. And so you have like so you have first the sediment bulldozers who don't dig into the sand at all, basically, and that's characteristic of the Ediacaran fauna. And then at the start of the Cambrian fauna, you got the first sort of sediment bulldozers who are going underground, like your preapulid worms, your penis worms, for anybody who's never heard of them, which are in the same large invertebrate group as arthropods, the ecdysozoans, because they shed their skin. And then you continue onward, and you have more like different squiggles and different burrows underground and spirals and all sorts of stuff. So
James Valentine's book on the origin of phyla goes into that quite a bit. That's a good source for finding out about these trace fossils and what they're doing.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's a really good book.
And there's also a lot of evidence now from geochemistry about the major changes that we're undergoing in the atmosphere and in the sediment layers of the ocean that were concurrent with the so-called Cambrian explosion. That you got bioturbation going on, you got oxygenation increasing, and that's what fueled the rather rapid proliferation of large-bodied forms with hard parts.
Yeah, absolutely. There. It was one of the. No, it wasn't that paper. There was a paper on durophagy, which is organisms who eat hard-shelled animals who eat hard-shelled animals in the Cambrian. And so that was one of the things they discussed, was how the composition of the ocean changed from like being predominantly I think it was aragonitic to calcitic or something like that. One of those, one switched to the other basically, and that allowed for the animals to make shells, hardened like calcium carbonate shells and that sort of stuff. All very interesting stuff, none of which ever gets talked about by creationists because they don't really care about it.
Well, it's the Bible, so who cares, right?
That's, as Peter likes to say, yeah, the truth never changes, which is why, the Bible's still right. The truth never changed, right? There was something else he said that he said plants appeared 600 million years ago. That's not correct at all.
No.
Plants didn't appear until, well, there are some spores in the Ordovician, but land plants didn't appear until I think the Silurian, so like 440 or so million years ago. So that's way later, after the Cambrian.
Unless you're willing to count alga as plants, which I'm not.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if you say like, is Viridi plantae, is that like, plants? Well. There are, interestingly, there are stem embryophytes in the Cambrian, which I know, big shock. The ancestors of plants were around before plants were. And they have characteristics that were sort of intermediate between like charophytes, which are an algae that are closely related to plants, and the actual land plants, the embryophytes, which, is crazy. It's crazy that transitional fossils would be in there.
No, transitional fossils don't exist.
That's true.
Yeah.
Parafunaria, I think, was the name of that one. But it doesn't exist, so don't worry about it, guys. I just made up a word.
Yeah, okay.
Actually, do you watch Professor Dave's channel? He makes very interesting videos.
I've watched some of them. I'm kind of spotty in what I look at on YouTube, but yeah, I've seen a few of them. Yeah.
Yeah. If you, I'm out here, shilling myself, but yeah, you should definitely see the Stephen Meyer one. I think you'd enjoy it.
No, I enjoy nothing about Stephen Meyer. He is the most pompous ass. I
do. I have to throw a new one at you. I know you've heard the Cambrian one before, but he actually says, we have him on video saying that mammals appeared in the Eocene.
Oh, just poof like that.
Yes, just poof like that.
Spontaneously created in the Eocene. Okay.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So just ignore Jeremiah and Rapenamammus and all the mammals in the Cretaceous and the late Jurassic. Don't worry about those guys. They're not real.
Yeah.
Don't worry about
them.
Okay. I have to wonder then, like, is he aware that the reptile mammal transition exists, like, at all?
It happened in the Eocene, don't you know?
You're getting like swarmed by bees or something, I guess.
Yes, I think the lights are dimming in here, so I was trying to adjust some things. But
but yeah, it's kind of amazing that he really thinks mammals appear in the Eocene. Which the funny thing is, he wrote. So I don't know if he wrote it, but he co-authored a paper, which was a chapter in an intelligent design book, and the co-author, or I guess the lead author on that, was Gunter Beckley.
Oh. Okay.
But the thing about that is, like, okay, look, I'll grant Meyer. Meyer's an idiot, but he's not a paleontologist, right? But right. Beckley is a paleontologist. He's an invertebrate paleontologist, mind you, but he should know better. They wrote that in their paper, and he should know better.
Well, yeah, and Meyer, he's got a philosophy degree from Oxford or something. He should know better, shouldn't he?
I mean, I would assume so, because his first degree was in geology, right? So I'm pretty sure they teach you history of the Earth, in at least one of those geology classes.
Yeah.
But now
all of the creationists ought to know better.
Yeah, now you're assuming that knowing better also means that they're going to be honest about that. I mean, I recall one of the reason I got invited by PZ to do the movie that the Young Hovind made that you did a review about.
Oh, right.
And that was after
Genesis.
Yes, and that was after me getting introduced to you on I think that was on Jackson's channel, where I asked you how it was possible.
Paradise Lost, right?
Yes, where I asked you how it's possible that Georgia Purdom can have the degree that she has and still refuse everything about evolution. And that's where you explained it, that you can just take different courses and just completely zone out, completely ignore that part. So the fact that they might know better, there is a distinct degree of dishonesty involved in all of this as well. It's just sticking the fingers in your ears, closing your eyes to all the evidence.
Right. And even if she didn't take courses specifically in evolutionary theory or evolutionary biology, supposedly, if you've got a PhD, you've learned some scholarship and you've learned how to sort out, fact from fiction and all that kind of stuff. And she has to be consciously recognizing any of the data or information.
But that goes for
Right,
literally all of
absolutely.
them. So earlier, Banana Man was brought up. How many people have explained to him the process of evolution, and he is still misrepresenting it to this day? It goes in one ear, out the other, and I think I know why, because there's nothing in between to hold it there. So, but that it's
Well,
just
but I know
sheer.
in his case though, he he interviewed me,
Mhm.
and I know that he deleted major parts of that interview. So he
Mhm.
had to be aware of and conscious of, oh, I can't include this thing
This
that he
looks bad
said.
for my argument.
Yes,
Yes. So
and
there's a fundamental dishonesty.
I have to give credit to Godless Engineer, because he at some point he put out on his I think it was on his Facebook page or whatever, that people could contact him and then he would interview them. And so Godless Engineer actually responded to that, but he recorded the entire interview and then waited for Ray Comfort to put it out, and then put that next to what he had recorded in order to show how much of it was actually just edited out. Jackson had the same
Well,
thing
Matt Powell did
with
that.
Matt Powell.
Yeah, Matt Powell. Yeah, absolutely. He did the same. Yeah, the problem is it was the original debate or discussion, whatever, that we had was on YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
So he took the YouTube video and just cut out all the parts where I was speaking.
Yes.
And it's like, what are you doing? And the funny thing is, actually, I learned of a guy recently named Forrest Valkai who actually who mentioned that. He was responding to Matt Powell, and he looked up, I guess, just typed in on YouTube Matt Powell, and the discussion that I had with him came up, and Powell's clipped version of that discussion came up, and he pointed out, like, look at how dishonest this is. It's like, yeah, I know, I feel seen. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which was really cool. He seems like a cool guy. But so well, let's see, we're coming up on the 2-hour mark. So PZ, what's going on your end? Got any YouTube stuff coming up that you want to talk about?
Sure. I've got a few things in the works. I'm going to be reviewing a couple of books that I've received recently. So
good books or bad books?
No, good books. I'm actually quite pleased. I got let's see if I have it handy here. Oh yeah, I can give you a preview here. This is one I want to do next.
How to
build
a human. Okay.
It's aimed at middle school and high school kids, and it's a pretty good summary of key events in the evolution of humans. So I want to talk about that one. I've also got another one that I'm working on. It's called I don't know. Would I be demonetizing you if I use this word? It's called bitch.
I mean, I guess not.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know. I feel like
that's pretty mild compared to what
I mean, I have had one lying next to me for the entire show. She's 17 years old, and
yes.
I really like her. So I don't see how that could be a bad word that could get you demonetized. Because,
well, the thing is, and I think
we've said worse.
This is a book that I think Jackson would really appreciate, because what it is talking about evolution of female traits, and taking a zoological perspective and looking at different lineages and asking how they acquired the particular characteristics that are true of the females and the males. Focuses on the females, but okay. And actually, the first chapter has this provocative question you may have heard going around: what is a woman? And she answers it. And it's not the answer that Matt Walsh is looking for. So I think that'll be fun to go through. And then, of course, I still have to put together a video It's going to be a fairly long one, I think, because it's a complicated subject on Nick Lane's newest book, Transformer.
Oh,
which is
okay.
marvelous. Evolution of Metabolism. Whoa.
Let me add that one to my Amazon wish list. Another one.
Yeah, I don't think it's out. I think it comes out in July, so we're getting close. So I'd kind of like to get this video done before the book is released, but around that
Did you
same
see that Steve Brusat's new book, the about the rise of mammals is coming out? Because he wrote The Rise and Fall of the Dinosaurs, which was really good, and his book on the Cenozoic just came out. So.
Oh, now what was the author's name again? I'll put it on my list.
Stephen Bruce. Here, I'll actually put it in our side chat here. Stephen, he's British guy.
Ah, okay. All right, very good. See, we don't have to just talk about stupid creationists. There's lots of good science out there to discuss as well.
Also, Shannon Q asks, is that the 5 islands of Nova Scotia behind you?
No, this is La Push, which is out on the west coast of the Olympic Peninsula in Washington State. It's one of my favorite places on the planet. It's really gorgeous.
Nice. I really did enjoy Nick Lane's book, The Vital Question. I should probably read it again. It's been a couple years since I read it. It was eye-opening to see, because I'm not a chemistry person by any means, and to read his summaries of like systems chemistry research and geochemistry and all that sort of stuff was very eye-opening, to say the least. Yeah,
this one is entirely about, well, almost entirely about the Krebs cycle.
Oof. You know what the real Krebs cycle is, PZ? It's remembering and then forgetting the Krebs cycle.
Oh, I'm not allowed to do that because I still teach it.
Right. I mean,
but that was what was wonderful about it, is he was bringing all these insights into all the intermediates in the Krebs cycle, and how they play a role in like the greater functioning
and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah. So we're counting carbons and all that kind of good stuff, but also noticing all these other pathways that branch off of the Krebs cycle and how it's indispensable to the biochemical functions of the cell. But also that it's not the ancestral pathway that organisms use to generate energy.
Right. He talks about the acetyl-CoA pathway in
right, and also pentose phosphate pathway. There's a bunch of pathways that when you actually look at them, they're very revealing about the biochemistry behind the Krebs cycle. So so that's what I want to talk about. But it'll take me a while to get all this together.
That sounds very interesting. Peter, what's going on over on your end?
The opposite of what PZ just said. Yeah, I'm so the 27th.
You're reading books?
No, well, no, not that. But PZ said he's going to review good books. The 27th, I'm going to have a creationist on who has a entire website and everything. A guy called Sheepdog Apologetics, and I'm currently setting up a conversation with a guy who thinks that hell is expanding and hell is on Earth, therefore the Earth is expanding.
Wait, hold on. Yeah. I remember that guy.
Maddie.
Oh my god. Okay.
Maddie, crazy Maddie.
I remember him.
Yeah, he started following me again, and he still owed me that conversation, so I just jumped on that and said, hey, great, you're following me again. After he keeps following and blocking me for some reason. The conversation never happened. So, but apparently that now is going to happen. And other than that, we're on Ross channel. We're actually reviewing a couple of books as well. One it's a very elusive book. You may have heard about it. It's called the Bible. So we're going to read that cover to cover. And if that wasn't bad enough, and it messed with Arn's brain because he completely forgot to tell me. He had mentioned that he would do a show on that, and then last Sunday, actually, that show happened, and he hadn't told me, so I didn't have any artwork for the show, nothing. But we're also doing the Book of Mormon, so. if you want to lose brain cells or just want to listen to us having fun going through these books, for both shows, there's the great panel for both shows. The Book of Mormon, we have Mr. Dady, we have Jimmy Snow, so it's a lot of fun because they're doing several parts of the book in voices with a New York accent, which is great apparently. So, but yeah, those are really fun shows.
I lived in Utah. Yeah, I lived in Utah for 7 years, and I got more than enough Mormonism. So, yeah,
right in the heartland.
Huh? Did you manage to visit Paradise? Because isn't that there too? The Garden of Eden, isn't that? We need to get to that because they found the Garden of Eden, and then they had a conflict within the church, and the party that split off actually owns the rights to the plot of land where the Garden of Eden used to be. So now the Mormon Church has found Eden and lost it again through some heretics who have left the church and started their own church, which is
is it conveniently in Utah or is it in Illinois or something?
I forgot exactly where it was. I thought it was in Utah, but I'm not entirely sure. But apparently it's in the U.S. somewhere. Okay. And the Mormons no longer have access to that piece of land, which I think is hysterically funny. That the one true religion that found the Garden of Eden can no longer go there. They're kicked out twice.
It'd be even more poetically ironic if it was like there was like a factory built on it, nowadays or something like that.
Well, no, they got kicked out of Eden twice. I mean, you have to be the right religion in order to be kicked out twice, right?
I'm just amused that here you've got the one true religion, and immediately you start having schisms.
Yes,
there are so many different branches of the Mormon Church already, and it's what, less than 200 years old.
Right. Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, some of the cargo cults are even younger than that. You've got like Scientology's younger than that. It's within the past 70 years or so, isn't it? Something like that.
But they don't have the enduring history of all the Mormon prophets.
Well, I guess that's true.
Yeah, you've got somebody who's got a direct conduit to God, who's living in your group and can tell you what God actually said over and over again. Right.
I mean, that is pretty useful. It also helps when God changes his mind and decides it's okay to have black people in our group now. That's convenient.
Oh yeah. And they'll turn their eye the other way about polygamy and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's see over here. I mean, we're continuing with the Gibbon's Tale should be out relatively soon. Maybe I'll work on that after this. Who knows? Because that's finished. The script is all recorded and everything, so that's mostly done. It's really just the video part now. Next is the Howler Monkey's Tale. So that's a fun one. Also talks about the evolution of color vision in primates. So that's pretty cool. Also, there's a really fun twist to the story of how primates rafted to South America.
Surfed, you mean?
Right, they surfed.
They surfed.
Because, it's one thing that on the one hand, they got here, via surfing, right? As well as caviomorph rodents and I think a couple other groups. But there's a really cool twist to that story about primates rafting to South America, which I'm not going to spoil, even though I really, really want to. But you'll have to wait for the video to come out.
Oh, that's good marketing.
It's a twist that only dropped within the past 2 to 3 years, I think, something like that. So really recent stuff. But it's real neat. It's really cool. I'm excited to talk about it. But yeah, Gibbon's Tale is all about how to do phylogenetic analyses, and it ended up being like 30 minutes because turns out there's a lot of stuff that goes into building phylogenies.
Mm-hmm.
Who would have thunk it? Lots of math. You know,
Yep.
I'm not the biggest math person in the world, so I prefer to explain things qualitatively and then trying to explain like how these programs algorithmically search sequences qualitatively can be a little interesting. But anyway, so that'll be coming out soon. All right. Well, thank you for coming, PZ. I'm glad to
been
have
fun.
you. You're
Yeah.
always welcome back, of course, if you want to join us next week for more headbanging fun.
Sure, we'll see.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Absolutely. Peter, thank you for hosting and co-hosting, as always.
You're welcome.
Thank you, everybody in the chat, for watching. What did you say, Peter?
It's always fun coming on your channel. So, yeah.
Maybe we will save PZ from the swarming bees. Who knows?
PZ is just proving that everything deteriorates.
Oh,
Even his video footage. It's.
I think he scared off most of the bees.
I turned on killed some of the bees.
Well, everybody, thank you for watching, and we will see you all next time.
Bye, everyone.
Bye now.